developing, verifying, and validating products for new markets. So to introduce myself, I'm Hannah Leslie. I work in the design engineering team in the National Manufacturing Institute Scotland. And we work with a real range of companies with their product development journeys, so including the design development and the verification and validation activities that go along with it. So we also have a hand in supporting companies in accessing potential public funding for these development projects where necessary, and signposting to other partners in our networks where appropriate. So today I'll be discussing the product development process and looking at some of the kind of key considerations you need to make when looking to either develop a new product or to diversify an existing product into a new market. I'm also joined today by Caroline Roberts, who is a founding director of Astrimar Limited, and she'll be discussing some of the key stages along the product development process that you need to be considering risk and reliability. And she'll be presenting just after myself. So this will be kind of an introductory session, and we hope it's going to be most useful for innovators or companies just starting out in their product development journey, or who are already in this process but don't necessarily come from a design or development background themselves, or don't have that engineering design resource in-house. Just some housekeeping for the webinar before we get started. This is being recorded. It'll be made available on our YouTube channel, or our NMIS YouTube channel. Your microphones and webcams will be turned off for the session, just to avoid any kind of background noise or interruptions. But you can type your questions or comments throughout the session via the chat tool, which will be found in the WebEx bar. And we'll take some time at the end to answer them as best we can, and as many as we can. Feel free to also post your questions on Twitter using the hashtag NMISinsights, and our marketing team will be keeping an eye on them. So finally, please take some time after this webinar to complete our survey. It'll be sent out just to get some feedback on how you think it's going. So the National Manufacturing Institute Scotland, or NMIS, is a group of industry-led manufacturing research and development facilities where research, industry and the public sector work together to transform skills, productivity and innovation to attract investment and make Scotland a global leader in advanced manufacturing. So NMIS aims to increase productivity by reducing barriers to innovation, stimulate investment and increase manufacturing competitiveness, catalyse job creation and strengthen supply chain links, inspire and attract talent and equip current and future workforces with the skills that they and businesses need, working with manufacturing businesses of all sizes in multiple sectors with the overarching aim of providing benefits for the whole of Scotland. NMIS is operated by the University of Strathclyde, but it's also supported and developed by a whole range of other entities, including the Scottish Government, Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, Skills Development Scotland, Renfrewshire Council and the Scottish Funding Council, to name quite a few. But it is also supported by universities across the length and breadth of Scotland, so it really is a countrywide initiative in supporting Scottish manufacturing. So in terms of how NMIS is set up, it has two specialist centres that are already well established, the Advanced Forming Research Centre, where the design engineering team is currently based, albeit remotely at the moment, and the Lightweight Manufacturing Centre. So NMIS will also operate a number of core elements, the Manufacturing Skills Academy, which hosts a number of professional development courses, and the Digital Factory, which is currently in development, and there'll also be a collaboration hub. So importantly though, NMIS is operating right now. We can operate and support businesses today, so please feel free to get in touch and approach us if you'd like to know any more. So on to the webinar topic itself. When we begin to talk about new product development or product diversification, it's particularly into regulated markets in this case, it can look like a long and daunting process. And only a kind of small percentage of manufactured products ever do make it to full production. So it's really key to have a sound understanding of the process and what's involved to mitigate any risks associated with its development and ultimately have the best chances of success. So before and during the product development process, and this applies to both new product development, new product concepts, and existing products that you're looking to take to new markets or new applications, it's important that you're considering the aspects covered in this model. This is called the 3 lenses of innovation. It's by IDEO Design Thinking. But it's about striking the right balance between desirability, feasibility, and viability when it comes to developing and manufacturing your product. So if we split this out to look at each aspect in a little more detail, during the bulk of your design thinking and the initial work process, desirability is generally at the forefront of people's minds. It's about testing your ideas and validating your hypothesis about your users. So it really involves asking yourself some key questions such as, how can we make this design everything that our customers want? How can we be more responsive to early feedback from these customers? And how can we factor these additional requirements into the product in a realistic way? So essentially, this area is all about making your product as attractive as possible in terms of what it offers your customer. And obviously this is important and it's often weighted more heavily in importance, but during the product development process, you should really be bringing your focus again to the kind of feasibility and viability as well, so that your solution isn't only desirable and for the market, but it's also sustainable. So when we're looking at viability, we're looking at things such as, does this product respond to market trends and drivers? Is there a big enough need for your product? Is there a large enough market for this product? What's the value of this market? How much of this market is accessible to you as, in the location that you're based or with the resources that you have? So once you're a bit further along in your product development and you have an idea of what manufacturing and production costs might look like for this product, it's about asking questions such as, does the value proposal for this product make sense based on your target costs and volumes? So it might be that you need to revisit your positioning strategy for pricing, or look at other areas in the value stream where costs can be salvaged. And finally, is the target market going to accept this product based on the standards and codes that they conform to? So this is obviously of particular importance in heavily regulated industries. A lot of the sectors that we work with at NMIS and at the AFRC come under this, such as oil and gas or aerospace or medical devices. They all have regulations and codes that they generally conform to. So it's of real importance that we understand these standards or regulations so that we can ensure that our product will ultimately be accepted by market. So finally, in terms of feasibility, this involves asking questions such as, can it be manufactured, and can it be manufactured efficiently? So this might seem like an obvious one, but we have definitely worked with companies in the past who have done amazing work in terms of developing CAD models that are optimized for purpose, or simulation testing, for example. But now they need support because it's time to look at manufacturing feasibility, and it turns out it's not currently manufacturable at a realistic cost by any process. So we'll need to go back and readdress the design and look for some alternative routes. So finally, and a really important one, especially in the current climate, is there a reliable supply chain in place for your product's method of manufacture? So you don't want to find yourself in a position where you're having to single source from a supplier because they're the only one offering it, or having to source from maybe more fragmented supply chains that are entirely overseas, because this will leave you in a significant position of risk. So these concepts of desirability, viability, and feasibility should obviously really be considered throughout the product development journey, and you should be revisiting them often. But the bulk of this researching side of things will be in the earlier stages of the process, kind of during the initial idea generation and conceptual or early development side of things. But when we come to the design development, or the verification and validation activities that have to take place in order for the product to be accepted by market, we're moving into the next stages of the development and deployment activities. So I'll expand on that in just a bit, but to put it in a bit more context first, it's useful to have a good grasp of the technology readiness level scale, or the TRL scale, which you've probably seen before. It's very common, but the concept of TRL is a whole topic in itself, so I'm absolutely not going to go into too much detail about this. But essentially, it's a means for measuring or indicating the maturity of a given product or technology. So the scale I'm showing at the moment is just kind of generic guidance. So different industries often have differences in definitions and levels, but generally it goes from levels 1 to 9, with 1 being when you're doing your basic research, going all the way up through concept development, prototyping, testing, and finally level 9 is when it's fully proven and operational in a commercial market. So TRL levels, essentially, the way that we use them, they are a way for design engineers to understand what stage in development a product or technology is at. And generally, good engineering design is about bringing your product up through these TRL levels in a way that mitigates as much risk as possible. So one thing to note is that products might not always go right up the TRL scale in a totally linear way during this design process. You might get to a stage where you're modeling and demonstrating your concept at about TRL 4, only to realize for some reason that it's not quite functional in terms of the requirements that you're looking for or some other purpose. And you need to go back to either conceptualization or redesign at maybe about TRL 2 or TRL 3. So this fluctuation can be frustrating, to say the least, or at least disarming for innovators that aren't always aware that it's a possibility. And what we are always aiming to do in terms of product design and product development is pay as much attention and due diligence to every step in this process to de-risk it and reduce the occurrences of these iterations having to happen. Because as you get further and further along this development process, the more investment is required and more time consuming and costly these iterations are going to be. So in a similar vein, it might be that in one market your product is fully commercialized and available at TRL 9 and it's completely proven, but in a different application or a different market, you're only really at TRL 2-ish because there'll be a different set of requirements and standards in that new market. So in terms of how to progress along this product development journey in this new market, in order to be accessible, in order to be successful and accepted by market, you can either modify the existing design if necessary, or you can take the design and verify and validate that your product adheres to the necessary market regulations or requirements. So essentially proving that your product is safe and fit for purpose in the application that it will be used. So in terms of how we go about this design development, this is a typical design process. It's the one that we adhere to in the design engineering team. And it goes through 5 stages of opportunity, definition, conceptualize, embodiment, and handover. So the opportunity just relates to the gap. So it could be a gap in a specific market that's been identified. It could be a completely new or innovative idea, or you could be optimizing an existing technology. But in any case, you then move on to definition, which is where you're establishing, capturing, and documenting all the requirements that this product has to fulfill. And that'll include, customer expectations as well as any kind of finishings that you're looking for, any visual cues that you're looking for, and particularly any standards and codes that it must adhere to. So we capture these in a product design specification or PDS document, and then we use the requirements specified in this to generate our design concepts in the conceptualization phase. Then embodiment and detailed design involves developing the concept and bringing it to the point where we can define certain characteristics of the product, such as its geometry, material choice, production methods, and so on. And then obviously, finally, we hand over this with a pack detailing and documenting all the necessary information. So within this design process, it's the verification and validation aspects that are critical, that go hand in hand, because it's these activities that are going to ensure that your concept is valid in terms of function, safety, operation strength, and the requirements that we've already identified that it needs to have. So to give a little bit more definition, as to what verification and validation actually involves. At a very basic level, verification is a means for assessing and reviewing whether a design or process meets a set of requirements. And this will typically take place during the design and development phase. So for example, the conceptualization, embodiment, and detailed design phases. Validation, however, typically follows process trials or the manufacture of a representative prototype, so kind of near to the end of this process, after the detailed design stage, and is a process of proving that this design or concept meets the set of requirements and the customer expectations. And this is often supported through testing. So if we split the process out to look at where verification and validation fit into this process, verification happens at each stage because, as I've discussed, it's about assessing whether your design meets the requirements identified. So at each step in the process, the concept should be reviewed against the requirements or standards that it needs to comply with before you move on to the next stage. And again, it's about ensuring that you've put enough due diligence into the verification of this product to go on to the next stage so that you're de-risking it as much as possible. So validation happens towards the end of the process, where typically you're taking the kind of final representative prototype. It's made in the correct method of manufacture. So basically it's a pre-production prototype and you're testing it against the specifications that were previously defined and the customer expectations that you're trying to fulfill. And commonly this testing is with an independent third-party test house, depending on the application. So to wrap up what I mean by verification and validation, verification is about assessing the suitability of the design. And to do this, it's key to understand specific properties of the environmental and operating conditions. So these design assessments can include things like design reviews, design calculations, process modeling or simulation, and comparison with similar designs. And it's also crucial to understand the mechanical properties of your product, such as any loading and failure conditions that you need to take into account. So similarly, it's important to prove the suitability of a design to operate within the known environments and the operating conditions in a safe and acceptable manner through validation. So validation testing can include things like tensile testing, pressure testing, life cycle testing, functional tests, in-field tests, and so on. And the tests that are applicable will really depend on the product and the application and the standards within industry. So it might be expected that it has testing results for specific tests to specific requirements. So to execute these verification and validation activities effectively, it's important to understand the product lifecycle that you're proposing. So that includes things like the manufacturing of the product, how it's going to be installed, any maintenance that's going to have to take place, and the end of life. So how it's going to be decommissioned or disposed of. Understand the key characteristics of the product's operating environment and conditions. So any loading, wear, or corrosion considerations, for example, that you need to take consideration of. Perform detailed risk analysis, which I think Caroline is going to touch on later today. And finally, and most importantly, provide documented proof of due diligence. So this includes any documentation from the design development, such as early stage stuff, such as the product design specification that the concept aligns to, and all the way through the process, any verification or validation test results. So this is going to be key to be able to demonstrate to the market and any potential customers that every appropriate step was taken to ensure that the part or product is safe and fit for purpose. So this will especially be necessary for product certification in heavily regulated markets. They'll expect documented proof of due diligence. Sorry, easy for me to say. So just to finish off my slides for today, when starting this journey of new product development or product diversification, as I previously discussed, it's about fully addressing all of the aspects between the desirability, the feasibility, and the viability of your product. So it's really key to understand what are the ultimate goals and objectives and what is the benefit in you developing this product for your business. It's important to fully understand the target market in terms of its size, the key players, the economic landscape, and crucially, any industry regulations or standards relating to the product, which are either going to be compulsory or advantageous in increasing product credibility. It's going to be useful for you to have a realistic assessment of your product's current position on the TRL scale and an understanding of the design development, verification and validation activities that are going to be required to progress up through these TRL levels. And finally, it's crucial to have a realistic expectation about the costs and timescales involved in the product development process, especially if there are rigorous testing requirements. These can often be very lengthy products with significant investment required. So being able to kind of accurately forecast that and account for that is going to be crucial. So that is all from me this morning. I just wanted to thank you for listening and finish off by highlighting that within the design engineering team at NMIS, we're always happy to discuss any product development or market acceptance projects that you might be looking for support with. We specifically look at product design and development, method of manufacture assessment, TRL guidance, and verification and validation support. So please get in touch if you want to discuss anything I've talked about today further. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I'll now hand over to Caroline and stop sharing.
Thanks, Hannah. Okay, get my screen up for everyone to see. Hopefully that's my screen now showing. Okay, so thanks, Hannah, for that. So I'm going to be talking about the reliability and risk process within product development process. So my name is Caroline Roberts. I'm one of the directors of Astrimar. I'll introduce Astrimar first before we go too far. Okay. So Astrimar was formed actually in 2010, and we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this month, which is very exciting for us. We're an independent specialist engineering consultancy. We've offices near Milton Keynes in Bedfordshire and in Bury in Aberdeenshire, which is where I'm based. We focus on reliability engineering, integrity assurance, technology qualification, and technical risk management. Oops, okay. Our clients are mainly oil and gas and also offshore renewable energy sectors, but reliability is a much wider, adaptable approach than that. So our client base actually is far more diverse. We focus on understanding and preventing equipment failures at the heart of what we do. And we use our reliability engineering expertise to support the work we do right the way through the product and asset lifecycle. So we use the reliability techniques to identify technology risks, to look at potential failure modes, and from that to determine analysis, testing, design improvements, and operational mitigations. And the range of services that we offer to our clients basically is to help them develop and implement their own reliability risk management practices in line with industry best practice. And that includes analysis, assurance, and training as well. The slides that we're going to be showing today are based around some of the more detailed webinars and training courses that we offer. Our main focus is to add value to our clients by helping them to deliver highly reliable systems and solutions. So then I introduce technology qualification first of all. The qualification is about providing confidence that a technology will meet its function and performance requirements. It's particularly important when the technology is innovated outside of the remit of existing standards and regulations, and particularly when there's no direct guidance or validated requirements that would form the basis for technology acceptance. It's also particularly important when the reliability of the technology really matters. So, for example, if it may cause harm, damage, high costs, that sort of thing, if it doesn't work as intended. So technology qualification is basically a demonstration process that inherently forms part of the technology verification and validation process that Hannah was just describing. The intent of technology qualification is to provide evidence that the technology will meet the necessary function and performance requirements, that it's reliable for the intended service and life, and that any risks to its operation are well understood and well managed. So in order to demonstrate technology validity, the qualification testing and analysis needs to generate really extensive evidence that is sufficient to support and build an understanding of how the technology may fail and an understanding of its limits of operation. So it's not just a simple or standard function test. Technology qualification is also key to enabling new technologies that are replacing existing technologies, as quite often they will need to be able to demonstrate that they are at least as good as or better than the existing technology. Hannah introduced TRLs in her presentation, and we'll just talk a little bit more about them here. So they've been around since the 1990s. They were developed initially by NASA, and as Hannah said, they're for indicating the maturity of a given technology. Typically, the 1 to 9 ladder is what tends to be used, although some industries and some standards use slightly different definitions. But they are fundamentally linked to the product development life cycle. So I've just mapped to the side here the life cycle that Hannah was just explaining about. So, TRLs provide an indication of the stage in the qualification journey that the technology is on. They also provide an indication of the types of activities that you would need to be undertaking at each life cycle stage, and as part of that, then it helps you understand the scale and level of effort that you would need to undertake. So then if we look at the focus for risk and reliability through the TRL and technology development process, then we can look at that in the context of TRLs. So at the low TRLs, the reliability work is mainly related to getting a feel for how technology is going to work, for feel for the reliability requirements in terms of function and performance. But it's also a really key time to start to understand the material properties of the technology to be sure that it's going to be able to support the required functions. In the mid-TRLs, where the design for reliability effort really tends to be focused, it's about understanding the limits of operation and improving robustness to achieve reliability inherently within the device. And then for the high TRLs, this is where attention is focused on improving and growing reliability, and where defects are identified from, for example, from the manufacturing process, and continuous improvements are made. There is real value in doing as much as possible in understanding and removing failure modes during the earlier stages of TRL, and to increase reliability and robustness at that stage, because then the need for design change later will be minimized, and it's in the later stages when it becomes far more costly and far more risky to try and introduce new changes. So in terms of delivering reliability through the qualification process, we focus on the verification and validation of the technology to help us to design in and demonstrate reliability before it goes into service, so that we can provide confidence to the end user. So technology qualification basically ensures that the reliability and robustness are inherently addressed through the design process, and that is achieved through undertaking materials testing to understand the material properties, material behavior, limits of behavior, and degradation processes. It's also achieved through doing robustness testing to identify and reveal weaknesses in the design, particularly in the presence of exceptional loads and conditions, so that improvements can be introduced. Reliability growth testing supports the identification of improvements both in the system and component reliability over time, by systematically stressing the equipment to identify and remove failure. And then by testing multiple units, for example, through replicated tests and testing in a range of environments, then we can build up statistical data to help us have more confidence in our prediction of reliability. We can use technology qualification process as well to define acceptance testing and integration testing for the manufactured products. And that helps us to ensure that the inherent reliability of the product isn't compromised by the introduction of defects through the manufacturing process. Stress screening, can't say it, stress screening is often used for that to reveal defects. And then finally, we can use qualification testing as well as part of understanding, having the increased understanding in failure modes, to identify opportunities for monitoring performance through life and designing that into the product so that we can look for critical failure modes as part of life management through inspection and maintenance as well, and then through defining operating guidance. And all of that helps to achieve improved through life reliability. So if we look a little bit at the areas of focus for the different stages of product development, start with the define and conceptualize stages, which are roughly around TRL 3 and 4. Then the focus at this stage is understanding the physics, the function and the performance of the technology, including understanding material properties of the specimens. So we would demonstrate functionality through models or lab mock-up tests to ensure that the physics and the function and performance principles are fully understood. Sometimes that may require physical scale models or early prototypes as well. We'd undertake an initial failure mode assessment to identify how the functionality of the design could be impaired. And we would tend to use a FAMICA, failure modes effects and criticality analysis to support this. The selection of materials would be really key at this point, and so understanding the failure mechanisms and degradation mechanisms of the materials is really key at this stage. So there'd be testing of materials to confirm the material properties and degradation processes. There'd also be a good time to develop computer models to support the physical testing, particularly where there is sufficient knowledge by this stage of the physical principles that need to be understood. It's also important to start to identify some of the longer life reliability drivers. I think about where components may be particularly vulnerable, thinking about anticipated operating conditions and environments, and not just for the actual operating stage of the equipment, but also through storage, through handling, through manufacturing, through installation and through operation as well. This slide I'm going to use to illustrate the importance of understanding the uncertainty in the technology's ability to survive the conditions it will see. So typically when we design a product, we will design it to withstand its expected design loads and stresses. And we would need to have an understanding of what those are going to be. And then we would design the product to have a strength greater than that. And we design it in with a margin of safety to have confidence that it's not going to fail. However, there is going to be uncertainty around the loading that the product will actually see in life. And we can then reflect that in this distribution. And that might be different environmental loads. It might be a variability in the way the user is going to use the product. In addition, there's going to be uncertainty around the strength of the product. And that might be due to variability in the material properties, uncertainty in the possible inclusion of defects, or over time it would be related to the degrading strength as a result of degradation processes. Where these two curves and these two distributions overlap basically represents possible scenarios of reality where the loading could actually be greater than the strength of the product and ultimately would cause failure to occur. Or as we would tend to look at it as reliability engineers, the probability of failure at this stage. So the designer needs to reduce that degree of overlap and to basically reduce the probability of failure to have more confidence in its reliability. So we can reduce that overlap through improving the material properties of the actual product, or by improving our understanding of the behavior of the product. And that's where qualification testing comes in, understanding where the strength limits are and reducing uncertainty in the behavior. We move on to the next stage in the product development process, then we're looking at the embodiment and detailed design of the product. And the focus for that is on making the product as reliable as possible as a device. So at this stage, we're going to need to go back to our understanding of failure modes and failure mechanisms. We'd update that and make a more detailed assessment given what we've learned in the earlier stages, and have a think about in more detail the kind of failure modes and mechanisms that would be seen. We would be building a prototype at this stage and testing it in a test lab and using that to visualize, demonstrate form, fit, and function capability. And that would be part of our physical testing. But also we would maybe have virtual or computer prototypes to undertake analysis and simulation and support the physical testing that way as well. Once with this, the prototype in place, we would maybe undertake some life testing, accelerated life testing, highly accelerated life testing to understand the durability of the product, of the prototype, and create inherent reliability and robustness into the design. And we would use that to establish and confirm our understanding of operating and destruct limits of the technology. And then by replicating tests at this stage, we start to build greater statistical confidence in the overall performance of the equipment. This would also be a time when we would look at undertaking system reliability analysis to understand the wider system failure modes and the impacts of component failures. And that would help us to understand the relative importance of different components and give us opportunities to improve the overall prototype reliability, maybe through introducing redundancy or increasing robustness in individual components. Once technology is ready for handover to system integration, we're around the TRL6 level, and we're now focusing on the manufactured product as opposed to the prototype, and we want to be able to have assurance that the manufactured product is going to have the same inherent reliability as we've already achieved through the prototype, and that we're not going to be introducing defects or reducing inherent reliability through the manufacturing process. So again, we would need to look at the FAMICA again, and we'd update that to assess the additional risks of manufacturing and the risks of introducing defects through manufacture assembly, and further on into transit, storage, and installation, and think about what kind of mitigations can be introduced. Maybe it's procedural mitigations, or maybe it's through improved testing and inspection following manufacture. Once we have the production unit built, even at the first off, then we need to be looking at the possibility of defects having been introduced, and environmental stress screening is a good way of identifying and revealing defects to then improve the process and ensure that the product goes through to operations without defect. We'd also be looking at undertaking physical testing under real operational loading, and that might need specialised environmental test rigs to be able to do that. It's good to have monitoring capability at this stage so we can really understand the behaviour of the product under the operational loads. By monitoring at that point, then we can confirm our understanding of the degradation and performance of the product is still within the limits that we specified as part of the process. All the way through this, we're going to need to carry on collecting and collating performance data to have improved understanding and confidence in the technology reliability and in the residual uncertainties that remain before the product is deployed for operation. So testing to demonstrate function, we need to be conscious is not the same as testing to demonstrate reliability. So reliability, it basically represents the probability that the product will not fail. And in that, there's inherent uncertainty in any claim on reliability. So we need to be able to undertake multiple tests to have increased confidence in the reliability of the product. And the more tests we have, then the higher our confidence levels can be. So depending on the industry, there are equipment standards that do sometimes give indications of numbers of testing that should be done, but they don't necessarily even then give the sufficient confidence that we need. So we're just going to have a look at an example. So this example is of a product that maybe needs to have a predicted life of 200 cycles to failure. Now that is a mean value, a mean cycles to failure. But that means that in a population of identical components, some will fail before that mean time and some will fail after. So we need to have a think about how many cycles do we need to test for to demonstrate confidently that the product will have sufficient reliability. So this orange curve using a chi-square distribution shows the confidence in that reliability claim if we do undertake 200 cycles for testing. And basically, if we read off the 200 cycle line, we can see that we only have 63% confidence of that mean cycle life of 200 cycles. If we increase our test frequency to 400 cycles, then we can have a greater confidence that it will actually achieve the 200 life. It's an 86% confidence now. Increasing to 600 test cycles, our confidence goes up to 95%. And if we were to do 1,000 test cycles, then our confidence goes up to 99%. So we can see very quickly that there is real value in potentially in increasing our confidence in the technology reliability just by having a greater number of cycles or replicates to generate more data. We have to also though think that about the importance of having that high level of confidence in product life. There will be situations where we don't need that confidence, where failure is not so critical, and so the testing may not need to be to such a degree, but that needs to be thought about when planning how much testing to undertake. So as part of the presentation, I hope I've been able to explain a little bit about the key benefits of qualification, the focus of reducing technical risk and uncertainty through a structured test program that's aimed around understanding potential failure modes and uncertainties. We've looked at it in terms of the product development process and the process through the different TRMs. And the idea, as this graph shows, is that through the more testing that we do, the better understanding we have of the overall performance, but also the reduction in uncertainty that we have in that performance as well, which means that we can then claim far more confidently that the product is going to do what it needs to do when it's deployed to the customer to use in earnest. And the risk matrix in the little bottom corner of that graph really basically shows what our overall objectives are, that we want to move that unqualified new technology from the high risk, high probability of failure, high severity potentially of failure area of the risk matrix down to something that's far more managed and far more competitive with alternative technologies that the customer may be looking at. So that's all I was going to say this afternoon. So I think I'll hand back to Hannah to open the floor to questions.
Sure, I'll just take over there. Thanks very much, Caroline. That was really interesting. So I think we've had question come in during your presentation there, Caroline. It's been addressed by Rory Ingram in the comments, but I'll ask it away, see if you have any input. But Abdesh is asking, is there a defined limit for safety factors to consider in terms of a percentage? And Rory's provided some input in terms of it's dependent on the application and the applicable standards. So some standards have design factors built in, meaning it's very much on a case-by-case basis. And if excessive factors of safety might add unnecessary cost or weight or expense. Do you have any further input on that for Abdesh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so obviously standards would be the first port of call, and the need to demonstrate compliance with relevant standards is the ultimate driver for anything like this. What is interesting, though, is that quite often the safety margins in standards are basically deterministic values. They're based on sort of kind of minimum mean loads of strengths and maximum expected loads. They are inherently conservative normally, but because they are deterministic, they don't reflect the uncertainty and the variability that could be seen. So this is what, so the graph that I showed with the overlap, sometimes you can still have that overlap, but there's still a possibility of failure even when you apply a safety margin. It may be a very low probability of failure. It could be surprisingly high, depending on how uncertain your situation is. And so it is important to understand how relevant the standards are to the specific application, because sometimes that they're not fully reflected, but also to think about how variable your uncertainties are and whether you've really taken that into account as part of setting the minimum capacities and the maximum loads.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. I think yep, so if we've got any further questions, feel free to just pop them in the chat. So from Hani Ganji, we've got a question saying, thanks for the presentation, folks. Are we seeing many companies asking for support in circular product design? I think the answer is overwhelmingly yes. It's very much where I think most of the market is looking at the moment in terms of how to implement circular practices into the design. So not just choosing sustainable manufacturing processes, for example, but intrinsically choosing a manufacturing product development cycle that means that the product can be either reused or remanufactured, maintained, and there's a lot of support and funding support at the moment for that theme. So funding partners such as Zero Waste Scotland are looking particularly on the circular economy side of things. Oh, Jim Hannigan, sorry about that. Thanks. So I think maybe one for Astrimar is how to, say you're a company looking to get involved in this product development and you're needing to consider things such as risk and reliability. It's how to balance the available funding that you have available with the number of testing cycles to consider. So is there kind of a trade-off there in terms of the cost of these testing processes and the confidence required?
Definitely, there's a trade-off. I think a lot of it is about understanding the market and what the market is requiring and the level of confidence that they are looking for, and both in terms of the potential users, but also in terms of what you're competing with. At the end of the day, if you cannot demonstrate sufficient reliability, and that is a critical factor, then you will struggle to enter the market without that. If it's not as critical, then there doesn't need to be so much focus on it. But the key message, I think, though, is it's about providing that assurance process. You mentioned it in your presentation, Hannah, that the evidence of what you've done to assure that you've done everything you can in terms of understanding the risk and managing the risk. If you can demonstrate that, then even if there are gaps at the end, you can make that clear what those gaps are. And those gaps can then be managed through inspection, monitoring, more defined operating procedures, user manuals and that sort of thing, more frequent maintenance maybe for the early years to really understand how the product is behaving. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to test to destruction, multiple times, but there are other ways of managing that risk. But technology qualification is about risk management. So you need to understand the risks, do something to say what you're doing to manage those, even if that is passing the risk over to the end user and saying, well, you're going to have to manage these risks, and this is how we recommend you do it through maintenance, inspection, and so on. So I think that would be the way that you would address it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much. We've got a great question just come in saying, standards are usually written based on established technology. Is this a barrier to truly innovative products? And I think that ties in very well with the kind of the technology qualification side of things that you were discussing, in that it involves being able to prove that every step along the process, given the appropriate amount of due diligence. Sorry, I struggle with that all the time. Due diligence to the product development to show that you've de-risked it as much as possible, in line with any existing standards, but also, if it's truly innovative, then out with them. Do you have any further comment on that, Caroline?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think you can take benefit from existing standards and find sometimes standards that are similar or relate to similar technologies. And I think sometimes there is benefit in being able to hang your new technology off of those standards as well. But I would say it doesn't necessarily, you can't necessarily hang it completely off of those standards if they're not 100% relevant. And you may need to take parts from it, but use it to inform the kind of testings that you need to do, and analysis. But that it does really need to be driven by a failure mode driven approach, if you don't have relevant standards to work with. One thing that we've come across with some of the technology developers that we help is that sometimes the end user will place a standard on them that they will say, well, we will only accept that if you comply with this standard, and so on. And when those standards are directly and not relevant, then that can also be a real problem, and it becomes quite a struggle to demonstrate to the end user why those standards are not relevant. Maybe some parts are relevant and they can meet those, but it does, I think, sometimes need to be a real conversation with the potential end users.
Yeah, and a question we get quite a lot when we're kind of working with companies at the AFRC or at NMIS is, when is the best time to be engaging with partners, such as ourselves at the AFRC or yourselves at Astrimar on this product development journey? And we generally give the advice of, we'll work with people from conception to prototyping, but generally we expect people to know the market inside it and know the kind of standards and the requirements that they're looking to fill. And having engaged potential end users, that's about the stage that we would expect people to be at before trying to seek kind of the design engineering side of things. Is there, in your idea, is there an appropriate time for people to be engaging and thinking about the risk and reliability engineering aspect?
I think there needs to be a concept to be able to think about it. I think if you start thinking too soon, then yeah, you've got nothing to assess. Yeah. When you're starting to think about the concept, then I think there is benefit in starting to think about risk and reliability, both in terms of having a feel for how the technology is going to be used, where it's going to be used. Is it safety critical? Is it environmentally critical? Does it matter if it fails? For short term, long term, is it difficult to fix? All those kind of issues, which are more about how it's going to be used and what the actual technology is and how it's going to function, then you can start to think about those quite early on. And also, if it's competing with an existing technology, then understanding how the existing needs are being met, where how reliable existing technology is, where problems maybe have been experienced that you want to improve upon. Those are kind of some of the early things that you would think about. And once you've got your concept, then you can start to look at a functional level where your priorities are in terms of making sure those particular functions need to be the areas of focus for the qualification process.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had another question that's very interesting. So has the coronavirus pandemic led to increased risks to the user? For example, ventilators starting to be manufactured by companies who may not have had medical device experience?
That's a very interesting question.
Yes, no, I mean, certainly that's been a key consideration for the NHS and Scottish Government when procuring these items, is that many people these days have access to, you know, a 3D printer in their garage, and you can make something.
I'm finishing 2 minutes and I'm going for a shower.
Hello? Sorry. So yeah, so that is definitely a risk in terms of these kind of uncertified devices maybe being used in a way that's not necessarily safe, or at least hasn't been demonstrated to be safe yet. I'm sure Caroline will have a further comment on that.
Yeah, we're actually about to start some work in that area with AFRC. I'm not sure how much we can say about it at this stage, but we are looking at that because we understand that there is potentially stockpiles of manufactured equipment that has been made to meet the COVID crisis that hasn't been certified because it's being made by people who are not aware of what needs to be done to certify the technologies. And I think this kind of urgent response that people have implemented has been a great reaction, but because there is that lack of understanding of what needs to be demonstrated in terms of quality and reliability, then it's become a real barrier to those technologies being adopted into the NHS. I think some people have managed to get them into sort of less regulated areas of the frontline service, so care homes and places like that. But I think there is a real stockpile, and it's that there has to be a learning from that says that people need to understand what the requirements are before they start making stuff. And that is it's a learning process that I think a lot of people that haven't been experienced in this before did not realize that there would be this barrier. They thought they were helping, but ultimately the NHS do not want technologies in the hospitals that are not demonstrated to be reliable and could fail at the most critical moments. So yeah, watch this space.
It's work being done.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's getting on to 12:30 now, and I'm aware people will be wanting to maybe get a bit of the sunshine or get lunch. So if anyone doesn't have any further questions, I think we'll wrap up there. But please feel free to contact either Caroline or myself, or the info@inmis.scot. Sorry, info@afrc.strath.ac.uk. I'm all over the place, but feel free to get in touch and ask any further questions. Find us on Twitter. A survey will be issued afterwards, which would be great if you could fill out just to get some feedback on the webinar. But thank you very much for all joining today, and I hope you managed to get something from it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm just going to end the session here. If you've got any more questions, as Hannah said, please do feel free to get in touch, and I've put the email address there, innomis-inquiries@strath.ac.uk on the chat.
Yeah, there it is, much more succinct. Thank you very much. Bye everybody, thank you.
Thank you everybody. Bye.